Hey, on this episode of The Ethics Experts, we talked to Amy McDougal, who runs CLEAResources. She has a really cool background from the military. She was a JAG lawyer, and now she runs a consultancy. And she has some really interesting perspectives about what we can borrow from the military to drive better culture within our organization, how we can be better followers to increase our efficacy as leaders, and ultimately how we can leverage incentives to a more impactful way to drive more of the behaviors we want. Hope you enjoy it. Let's learn.
Welcome to the Ethics Experts, where we're elevating ethics and compliance and HR to the strategic level it's supposed to be.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Ethics Experts. If it's your first time joining us, welcome. And if you're a returning subscriber, hey bestie, you have such an amazing smile. You light up every room you walk into. See what happens when you subscribe to the Ethics Experts. You get a bonus greeting on every single episode. So hit that subscribe button as we change the world. I am here with the one and only Amy McDougal. She is an attorney. She's a certified compliance and expert professional, and she runs CLEAResources. And she's really cool, has a lot of great perspectives, and I'm excited to finally get you on the Ethics Experts. What's happening, Amy?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. I've listened to so many exceptional episodes, so to be a small part of this is really exciting.
Well, that's a great way to start the episode because that makes me feel pretty good. Thank you so much. So you have a really cool background. You came from the military, and you now run a consultancy, essentially, I think, where you help compliance teams drive more effectiveness in their programs. How is that for a summary?
That's exactly on point. That's center of the target. I started out my career as a lawyer in the United States Air Force as a judge advocate general. You might know it as JAG. Maybe you watched the TV show.
Yeah.
I do want to stress it's nothing like the TV show.
Well, I'd like to keep my fantasy alive, so don't ruin that for me, please.
Well, I did not get to run through urban areas with my weapon drawn and my service dress or go on submarines or fighter jets or things like that. But I did get a lot of experience, really, right out of the gates out of law school. The military is very good at throwing experience at you really quickly, whether you're ready for it or not. So after my active duty time and several years as a reservist during the operations Iraqi Freedom and Enduring Freedom, in which I was activated multiple times, I transitioned to in-house counsel at a company. That company needed me to build a compliance and ethics program. They were a government contractor, and they had multiple locations, and a problem on one tended to be a problem on other sites. So I kept thinking, why can't we get ahead of this? It'd be better to just to prevent the problem than to have to solve it, after the fact in multiple places. And that's where I really fell in love with compliance. I'm like, yes, I love this. Prevent the problem before it happens instead of having to deal with the aftermath. And so I got my certification, my CCEP, and after a period of years launched on my own, launched CLEAResources, which stands for Compliance, Legal Ethics, and Risk. And I've worked with companies of all sizes, public, private, all sorts of different industries everywhere between Anchorage and Miami over the past 10 to 13 years.
Wow.
So it's been really, really exciting.
So what was it about that opportunity to come in-house and build a compliance program that attracted you to it? And, you told us that once you started building the program and you saw the preventative value of it, it really resonated with you. But talk to me also a little bit about that journey into that light bulb moment where you were like, okay, this is something I can really sink my teeth into.
Sure. The transition out of the military can be rough for some, but if you're in the law, you're still practicing law, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe it's just a different kind. It's not practicing under the Uniform Code of Military Justice or the federal statutes, Title 18 or what have you. It's just under a different set of statutes. But being an in-house counsel is so much like being a JAG. It's just your stakeholders are a little bit different, right? If you're a judge advocate general on a base, your clients are the commanders on the base that run the different units. Whether it's, the pilot of Air Force One, the commander of Andrews Air Force Base, the commanders on the base that are running the mission, those are your clients. And you have a small capacity as providing personal legal advice to your troops, especially on planning wills and trusted estates, having a power of attorney ready to go if they need to deploy, deployment readiness, but also some small consumer issues that might come up. But your main role is to advise the commanders on the base as if they were the head of different business divisions. And the advice could be different. It could be on discipline. They have troops misconduct, right? Troop misconduct or other types of issues might involve civil law. or compliance. Oh, hey, somebody wants to give me a gift. Can I accept this gift? Government ethics laws, but you're giving advice on how to stay compliant with all the different regs, instructions, directives, and orders that exist in the military. So they're super good at standards and policies. They're all there, procedures, they're all there. But sometimes those commanders and keeping their eye on the operations need a little extra help and advice. And so going in-house counsel was a great parallel for that. And then my clients become the heads of the divisions of that company, right? And what they need to do about discipline if they have misconduct for, in their subordinates, what they need to do about contracting, how to mitigate risk. So there was an easy transition from being the JAG on a base to being a lawyer in a company. I think that the military spends a lot more time and energy preventing things from happening than some businesses do. And some of that is just the framework that's built in and the supervisory structure, whether it's Congress ultimately or the Office of the Inspector General. There's a lot of things in place in the military. A growing business that's really has a great product or service and has aggressive growth plans and a lot of passion for what they do, they don't have a lot of time, right, to think about, oh, well, wait, is that compliant? Right? Again, thinking outside the box, it might be outside the box of what's legal, but they're not. They're focused on driving the mission. Right?
Yeah,
They're
I mean, the
focused on
going
mission.
concern risk is a lot higher for a startup than it is for the military. The military is not going away.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's that existential threat that can lead people, right, to pay attention to what will keep the business running, not necessarily paying people on time, or did I file this report, or, am I collecting a garnishment the way that I'm supposed to when I got the notice that I just ignored?
Right.
There's a lot of things that are going on. And it doesn't necessarily go away as a business grows, because again, the more growth plan they put in place, even if as they get bigger, there's always the unknown. Mm-hmm. And my goal in leaving in-house for one company, I enjoyed putting a structure in place that would prevent things from happening in the future. That actually were policies that worked, training that worked, a way to monitor and audit things to catch them that worked. The only thing that was not all that rewarding about that, and every compliance professional can relate to this, is that you can't measure what doesn't happen.
Yeah,
it's a zero. And the physical security world uses this metric, right? The goal going through TSA is no one goes through with something that they're not supposed to have, right? Their metric is zero. Security incidents, right? Base security. The goal is zero breaches of base security. Everyone who comes on is authorized to come on. And so measuring zero is not all that rewarding. And so we have to measure other things in a compliance program. You can't measure the fraud that didn't happen.
Right.
But you can't measure the number of documents that would maybe have been stolen had you not locked the doors of the company at night and put in an alarm system.
Yeah, you can't measure the number of car accidents you avoided because you took such a great defensive driving course, Exactly.
So that is maybe not as rewarding as other metrics that might look like hockey sticks in other professions. Mm-hmm. But I kind of analogize it to a physical security mindset, right? Prevention is the key here. We're taking a physical security mindset. We're not measuring what happens, although we do track what happens to find the gaps, right, and fix them. But we're really aiming for nothing happening. And the other analogy I've given is, somebody said, "Oh, you're a lawyer. What do you do?" I said, "Well, I'm kind of like a primary healthcare provider for the legal health of an organization. Are you wearing your helmet when you ride your bike? Are you maintaining your weight? Do you have some healthy habits in place instead of being a specialist where someone came to me, and says, hey, is this lump skin cancer? Or, this is the particular problem I have." So I've chosen kind of more to be that primary healthcare provider preventive role. And I've just found that a lot more rewarding, although I've been the specialist at the other end.
But it's nice to never need a specialist,
Yeah. I mean, that's
because you're
really
just
the goal.
so healthy, nothing happens, you're good to go.
Right.
You die in your sleep at an old age surrounded by your grandchildren and great-grandchildren.
Exactly. And you hear people say, "Oh, compliance is so expensive." I'm like, yeah, try non-compliance. That's the saying, right? I don't remember where it came from, but if you think compliance is expensive, try non-compliance, because I read the headlines. It is super expensive.
Yep.
I've started doing industries.
I've started doing this return on integrity coaching for folks, and where I help them kind of calculate their ROI and build a persuasion path to get the resources they need. And that's something I tell everybody all the time. Like, if you're hearing that there's no money for what you want, it's because you're not being compelling enough, because there's always money for the things that are important. And I guarantee you, if you got into a deferred prosecution agreement or into a CIA, they'd find the money for it. You know what I'm saying? So the money is absolutely there. It's a question of expressing enough value to get your hands on that kind of money,
Yes, that's one side. And I would add that the other flip side of that is you need to understand the risk tolerance of your executive team or your board. And I've kind of watched this and watching the cannabis industry over the past, 5 to 8 years as the cannabis industry, as legalization came on board and states started to legalize and cannabis companies came together. I mean, you would think that being in a space where federally you're subject to prosecution, that you would want to make sure your compliance house was tight, right? But the people who gravitated to the cannabis industry, just by its very nature, were very risk tolerant.
Totally. Right.
They're just risk tolerant. And it was everything from, we're trying to do everything according to state law that we're supposed to. And, we don't have a lot of resources to designate to that, but we're trying to, what does it matter? We're selling something that's federally illegal. We don't have to comply with OSHA or Fair Labor Standards Act anyway. So we're already violating federal, there's a whole spectrum
such a different
of risk
mentality.
Tolerance.
Totally.
Exactly. And so I thought it might go the path of pharma. And I think that ultimately it might get to a pharma type culture, right? Highly regulated and, more of a mindset. But so in advocating for resources, you have to understand how risk tolerant your team is. Because you're supposed to be risk averse as a compliance officer, you just need to recognize if there's a huge mismatch between your risk tolerance and that of your executive team.
Yeah.
And then maybe you're not ever going to get the resources you need to feel comfortable in that position. And then maybe that particular company with that risk tolerance is not for you. Maybe it's not a match.
Yeah, I think I agree kind of fully with what you're saying. I think you can't express value, though. Like, it's impossible for me to express value to you unless I have some picture as to how you see the world, which includes your risk tolerance. Like, if I think you have a very low risk tolerance and it's actually really high, well, then my persuasion path to you and from my natural state might be, talking about risk the way I think about it, because I think that you think about risk that same way. If I'm talking, if I'm inaccurate with my assessment of what your risk tolerance is, the odds of me conveying something to you in a compelling way are almost zero. You know what I'm saying? Because somebody with a high risk tolerance, they don't really care about should as a conditional sort of angle. They care about could. You know what I'm saying? Like, they're could people, not should people. Like, could we grow this thing? Is this, not like what's the best thing that we can do to eliminate all kind of mitigatable risk, I mean, not everybody, to your point, does that. But like, what I find is difficult for folks is we talk a lot about you have to assess the like risk tolerance of the board or of the executive team. Inherently, that is a difficult process because the answer is a subjective one. Like, what is it? High, medium, low? Is it green, yellow, red? You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just kind of a sense, It's like you have to have enough conversations and iterations of scenario-based kind of discussion to kind of get a sense of like, is it high, medium, or low? And that what I have found is the refinement of that can be challenging for folks, right? Like, let me give you an example. I probably have a relatively higher risk tolerance than the average compliance person, just because I'm an entrepreneur and all that kind of stuff. And as we were building compliance, there were so many conversations with our compliance team where it was apparent that risk mismatch was like here, like it was in the conversation. And I was surprised at how many times I felt I was really trying to be very clear, because I know that this is kind of a dynamic that like we have to get on the same page. And I was really trying to be very clear about what my level was, albeit sort of amorphous and subjective. But the time it has taken for us to kind of calibrate that risk appetite was kind of surprising for me.
That's right. You're absolutely right. And I think this issue goes directly to the core of being dual-hatted for those that are dual-hatted as in-house counsel and a compliance officer. As counsel, you can step aside. You probably are not a decision maker. Usually you're in an advisory role providing legal advice. And you can say to the CEO, that violates this regulation. And the CEO, well, you know what? We'll pay the fine if it comes.
Yeah.
And you have to be okay with that. But as counsel, you're in that advisory role. You're not in the decision-making chain, right? As there's more scrutiny of compliance officers and their roles in the organization, and maybe targets placed on compliance officers for things they did or did not do, or things that they did or did not know, you're stepping into the operational space there. So your cloak of I'm merely in an advisory role is removed. And if your risk tolerance mismatches your quote chain of command, you're in the pot with them on that decision, where you have some immunity from that as I told them not to do it. That's not going to fly so much from a compliance officer saying that as it would from a lawyer, right? They acted against my advice. Lawyers shouldn't be in the hot seat for that. But a compliance officer, I mean, you can take scrupulous notes and you can mention there was a mismatch of risk, but at the end of the day, you're still in the operational chain. So this is where the conflict gets heightened between, this dual-hatted as a lawyer who might be pitched as deny and defend, and compliance officer that might be living more in a reveal and remediate kind of world, right? Position. There really gets to be that conflict of interest that can arise is heightened when you're a compliance officer in a decision-making role in the organization, and you do or do not have the resources you need. And so I think it's really important. But as you said, it's difficult. What language do we use for describing what the risk tolerance is? How do we fit something into it? Is it monetary range of damages? How do you measure damage to reputation? How do you measure damage to your competitive positioning in the marketplace? If you have accusations or things swirling around your company, that go to your level of risk tolerance. So it's leads to really exciting conversations. But for compliance officers, it's so important to know where yours is versus where your C-suite is, so that you feel, because a lot of the discord and discomfort of being a compliance officer can come from a risk appetite that does not match your own. Yeah, and there's such a disparity there, you're uncomfortable.
Right, and it almost feels like unethical or something.
Right, well, the companies can just choose to do something that is illegal.
Yeah, right. And that creates a lot of dissonance for folks sometimes. Yeah.
It does, especially if you're the compliance and ethics person. It should create some dissonance for you, especially if your core values have integrity in there, and your code says you're committed to compliance with all laws and regulations, and it can make you really uncomfortable. Right. So it is one place where compliance officers can sometimes, and that's when they sometimes reach outside to an external consultant to, hey, come do a program assessment and look at things. Here's how things are structured, and maybe it's a reporting line that's not working for them. They're reporting to like the 1% of companies as their ethics officer reporting to the finance, right? Or,
sure.
Yeah, something like that. Or it could be they're grossly understaffed, and it takes someone from the outside to point that out. It's amazing to me that companies hire people because of the resumes they have in front of them in the interviews. It's the best candidate, right? They're the best. And then something happens when they come in, and something like, well, we'll get a consultant in here to, take a. Well, you've hired the best. Right. And then there's some weird thing where sometimes you're dismissive of the internal voices, and then you look to, some external consulting firm or advisory firm or specialist or subject matter expert to kind of, give you perspective on something. So a lot of the engagements that I have, are in-house compliance officers or in-house counsel that have this sort of tension that they're working through, and they need that extra information from the outside to be persuasive, as you said, to have the conversation.
There's this quote from the Bible that it's always resonated with me, and it says, it's something like, a prophet is not without honor except in his hometown. And it's like, if you're, it's like the people that grew up around you, even if you become something else, they still look at you like this, this neophyte that joined the organization. And it happens, it's crazy. I mean, what you said really resonates with me, because I feel that way as a CEO sometimes, where our board is like, all right, well, we should get some advice. And I'm just like, I don't think we need advice. Like, this is kind of the answer, And it's like, well, let's get an independent person. It's like, well, all right, fine. It is funny, though. It's funny because, to your point, you hire this person, you're like, this is the person we're going to rely on. And then you hit some kind of a tipping point where I don't know if it's a trust thing. I don't know if it's a a rule of thumb type of a thing for a big decision. You want to get that outside kind of perspective. I don't know, but it's an interesting dynamic, you know?
Yeah. And you reminded me of the just experience of watching a general United States military. You know, everyone shouts their presence, everyone stands up and yells, "Make way," and they're all silent when the general comes through. But then their own kids don't listen to them, right?
Right. That's a perfect example.
They can't get their teenagers to do anything that they're supposed to do, like, you know, they're shoplifting or whatever. You know,
walk into the house and no one's saying "make way." Coming in the garage, you know what I mean?
Right. I mean, if you're a general, everybody's going to do what you tell them to do, except for your spouse and children. So,
humbling. There's all these humbling opportunities around us, you know?
Yeah, it's important that they're there too.
True.
You know, it's important that they're there.
Right, well, but next time my kids don't listen, I'm going to find the magic in that. I'm going to find the blessing in that.
Yeah. Good luck with that. And then let me know what that is. Just call me right away.
I will.
But in talking about the rank structure, though, it brings to mind for me, you know, the other thing that impacts compliance officers is leadership. You know, if you're a chief ethics and compliance officer, you're in a leadership role. And there's so many books. Just look on LinkedIn. So, books, TEDx talks. I mean, just everything on leadership, how to be a leader, how to get to be a leader, you know, the traits of a leader, develop your leadership skills, all of that, right? But what we don't see a lot of that it's so critical for all of us to consider and think about is followership. We all are leaders and followers. Right. Even the general that wears the 4 stars is still a follower.
Totally.
Of not only the regulations, but the American people, the people of the United States. That's the general, right? The president as the commander in chief, and behind that, the people. So even if we're in a leadership role, we all should think about, and I think write down, I think we should put this in writing. I'm a leader. Who do I lead? Who am I leading in the organization? What am I leading? Is it a budget? Is it a strategic plan? My staff, maybe champions or delegates across the organization, or compliance ambassadors, as they're sometimes called. Who do I lead? And then who am I following? And how can I be a good follower for that person? Because you can't have a leader really without something to lead or a team to lead. I mean, even I have a solo company, it's just me. And I think I use a lot of leadership skills in running CLEAResources, right? And the way that I strategize, I'm leading the company, but I don't lead other people. And in most contexts, if you're a chief compliance officer, you're leading people. There's a team that has to work there in the business. And for a team to work, you have to have a leader who's effective. You have to have followers who are effective. You can't have a leader with all sorts of other leaders also. Everyone's trying to lead. This leads to tension. Everybody's worked in a workplace where everybody's trying to spearhead something, right? So the leaders need to have good leadership traits, but they also have to have good followership because they're following someone. Everyone's following someone else, whether it's the business mission, whether it's a charter, whether it's a mandate from the board. We're all following something, and we need to write down, who am I following and what am I following, so that you can be true to taking the orders from above that come down to you and process those orders in a way that you're pushing them down to serve what the ultimate mission is, right? Because, it's not the general that gets in a Jeep and drives to a location where we have intelligence that the enemy is hiding. It's not the general, right? But there has to be the strategy in place, the general, and then it goes down, right? In the different services to different divisions, depending on whether it's a battalion or a platoon or a squad, it doesn't really matter, or a squadron in the Air Force. It gets pushed down, the mission gets pushed down. And so it's so key to think about followership and what am I following and how am I following that? And it helps if you believe in what you're following. Is it the business mission? Is there a product or a service that your company provides that means something to you on some level? Is it a healthy product? So it's nourishing people's bodies. Is it a service that people need to just maintain our society? Repairs in homes. Mm-hmm. No one is all excited about and finds glory in replacing a dishwasher, but it has to be done, and someone has to have the skills to do that, or fix the washing machine or the refrigerator or replace a roof, right? So all of these pieces, can you feel passionate about your mission? That is part of what you're following. And can you find something in that mission that is a calling, kind of like
animating
in the military?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, nobody joins the military to make money.
Right.
Right.
Which is a
That's not
huge
one of the
point. I
reasons.
mean, that's such a huge point. I'd like to kind of dive into that a little bit because I think there's a lot of things the military gets right, not only from a kind of like rules of engagement or, you know, lines on the road perspective, but also from an incentive perspective, like a non-monetary incentive perspective. But before we dive into
Absolutely.
that, I'd love to hear, aside from like just not even considering followership as a core kind of competency, what do you think people get wrong from a followership perspective, whether it's in general or in, you know, in specific with regard to kind of compliance teams or compliance officers?
I think it's easier to answer what people get right about it,
Okay, sure.
because I think what people get wrong about it can vary so much, and the cause of why they get it wrong can vary so much.
In terms of followership, you're saying?
Yeah, in terms
yeah,
of
okay.
followership. I mean, there's so many different ways to do it the wrong way, but I would say one wrong way, if I had to throw one out, would be focusing too much on leadership, showing that you have it, becoming it, the one-upsmanship, the taking credit for other people's ideas. And again, whether you're chasing that purely for your own ego, whether you're chasing it for a promotion, which means more money. And, you know, everybody has plans for their paycheck. That's okay, right? It's okay to have plans for your paycheck. It could arise out of that. But the positioning that you would do to be a leader is sometimes undermining the leader. So one of the best pieces of advice I got as a brand new employee, right, in the military was make sure you always do whatever you can to make your boss look good.
Right. Great advice.
To make your boss better. Even if your boss has done something maybe that they shouldn't have done, you mitigate the damage, you mitigate the embarrassment. Why? Because that's what's best for the team. It's what's best for the mission. It's what's best for the customer. That's not covering things up. That's not what that is. But it's not, quote, throwing someone under the bus.
Right.
And so I think the thing that people get wrong in followership is not recognizing when you're a follower, don't compete to be the leader. That's not the time to show your leadership skills and compete with the person who is trying to lead. And the other thing that I think people get wrong about followership is we don't get rated. We don't get evaluated in our positions at work on our followership. Nobody talks about that, right? Mm-hmm. Well, I'd like to see a little bit more leadership from you. What does that mean? You want me to take over someone else's work or edge them out?
Be more directive? You want me to point more?
Right. Are we really embracing team members who are fabulous followers, and are we expecting something more from them? I just would like to see Amy have more ambition. You know, it just doesn't seem like she wants to advance in the company, or he. It doesn't matter either way, right? Mm-hmm. But is that really how the person feels, or are they just trying to be a good follower and be respectful of the reality that's not their turn to lead? And so I think we need to have conversations about
that's great.
That. Not just leadership. We have to have conversations about, you know what, Amy, your followership has been fantastic. You've been a great team member. Your collaboration, your responsiveness, your support of the team. Instead of criticizing when there's been a mistake, you jump in and say, how can I help so that we don't make this mistake? We're not praising people for being good followers. That's not getting recognized.
I think it just needs to start, like, as I'm thinking about this concept, it's one I'd like to introduce at our company. And as I'm thinking about how to do it, I just think you just have to start talking about it all the time. You know, kind of introduce this topic and express to folks. I'm just kind of brainstorming. I don't really know. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, but like expressing to folks this concept and that this is as arguably perhaps more, but at least as important as leadership skills. That ability to be a team and follow the leader and clean up after the leader and support that person without trying to usurp their own, usurp their authority, whatever, yeah.
Exactly. You disable even the best leader if you don't follow. If you're also trying to be a leader, then you don't let your leader do what they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, and something else
anyone can criticize someone else's leadership skills.
Yeah,
it's open season.
Right.
There's no standard of perfection. There's certain traits. I ran up against this early on in my career with being a woman in the military, right? And certainly it's not unique to women in the military, but it's unique in that your rank is placed on your uniform. Your
It's
rank
out
is on
there.
your uniform.
Yeah, yeah.
Every single person you encounter, either their collar or their sleeve tells you where you are and where they are in the leadership followership structure. This is missing in the corporate world, except for titles, right? I mean, if
Yeah,
somebody's
right.
the chief, whatever, anybody who works in any other department who's not a chief knows the
They yell,
structure.
make way. Yeah.
But among teams that work closely together, that might not be the case. If you
Right.
get 6 people in a room who don't have a chief title and they're trying to work together on something, this is where you get, pardon the term, but pissing contests.
Mm-hmm.
This is where you get turf wars.
Mm-hmm.
This is where you get people taking credit for other people's ideas.
It's all ego driven. Yeah. Because the ego is
Exactly.
trying to assert what the insignia and what the medals or whatever convey,
And why? Because they think that's rewarded and praised in that environment.
Correct.
But if they know followership will also be praised in that environment, it's a disincentive, right? To try to show the leadership skills in that context. What you're supposed to be doing is supporting the team. And in order to support the team, you need to support Amy. Amy's leading this. For better, for worse, Amy's going to make mistakes. Your job, make those mistakes as painless and as shallow and as brief as possible.
Right.
That's your job. Can you do that? Instead of putting a microscope and a magnifying glass on every mistake that Amy's made and then going back to the team. Can you believe that? What she did is it was like going to set us behind 2 weeks and all of that. That's all well and good. That doesn't serve the mission.
Right.
It serves the person maybe, but it doesn't serve the mission. And so I think that is the other mistake on the followership side of things, is not being mission focused.
Do you think this followership thing is like a unique to the U.S. or like kind of a Western world problem, or asking it a different way? Do you feel like this followership problem is like less of an issue in other parts of the world due to sort of the cultural dynamics that are at play? Or do you think it's just a human thing?
It's definitely a human thing. It even just comes from, a 2-year-old is likely to follow you in some circumstances. Others, they're likely to run across the parking lot without you. But, there's a natural hierarchy. That's the word I want to use. There's a natural hierarchy that goes along with age. Some cultures are completely age-driven, right? It doesn't matter if someone has an IQ of 5 and you have an IQ of 500. If you're 19 and they're 80,
there's the respect
you're
there.
going to be doing what they told you to do. Very common in Asian cultures.
Yep.
That type of. In other cultures, there might be a socioeconomic kind of stratosphere, right? A ranking. And that isn't necessarily go to followership. It just goes to hierarchy.
Okay.
Right? It goes to who's higher and who's lower. Now, in an ideal world, I would love to see, instead of a ladder that's hierarchy, which is really how corporations are structured, is a reporting structure from the board on down. Everybody, you see an org structure, right?
Yeah.
It's like a ladder, right? I'd love to see it be more like a web.
Yeah, like a bunch of concentric circles or something, yeah.
Like a web, who's connected with who to work on the team, not who's above or below other people.
I think that's right. I agree with that, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that organizations that are the most effective think more like that than they do a hierarchy. Here's what I told you to do. You tell them to do it. You tell them to do it. Although in some certain industries, it has to work that way.
Like what?
In other industries, well, I mean, certainly the military, right? The order comes down. This is what we need to do. But in order to accomplish something on the line, manufacturing a vehicle on the line, this piece has to go in before that piece, has to go in before that piece. And if the superintendent or the foreman on the floor says stop production, we have either a quality issue or a safety issue, right? I mean, they have to follow that, or they can't make the thing that they're trying to make.
Yep.
In other contexts, software development, just the whole world of AI, the whole collaboration, the more ideas on the table, the better. Nobody's idea is objectively better than someone else's idea, right? We're all throwing in our ideas and resources, and you could grab any members of the team's idea. There's a whole concept of crowdsourcing. Throw it out and see what everybody says, and then we'll go with that, right? This is more of a web design than this is the hierarchy.
Yeah, the hierarchy maybe lends itself particularly well for like repeatable processes that need like a tight sort of quality tolerance that is just kind of the same thing over and over again, as kind of the factors of production sort of engage in a more collaborative way, and the sort of standard deviation of outcome expands. This kind of a model is kind of almost the only thing that works because there's so many factors and there's so many, whatever. If we're talking about even issuing
engineering, we're going to take what the
Exactly.
lead engineer said to build.
Yeah,
That's
right.
what we're going to do. I mean, other engineers might have weighed in somewhere along the way, but the top of the ladder is the person who makes the call.
Yeah,
this
and
isn't
maybe
true in the law.
Yeah.
It's not true in the law because, again, they're merely in an advisory role.
And maybe it's kind of correlated with like the extent to which sort of like creativity is required to produce the widget that we're talking about, right? Like if more creativity is necessary, then it's harder to kind of beforehand articulate, here's the recipe, follow these exact steps with no deviation. Right.
It's harder to be dictatorial
Yeah,
if you're seeking right brain input. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I don't like to think, I don't know if I'm allowed to call out a certain company, but
Please,
I like to think about Disney in this way. And I don't do any work for Disney, but
Nor will you after this comment. Just kidding.
I love Disney because you get the best of the right brain people in a room who are thinking about the magic. And then you have the most talented people, left brain people in the room.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
To make it happen with almost an unlimited budget.
Right.
And you can really create things that are like magic when you let all the right brain people listen, go wild, right? The Imagineers, and then you give it to the left brain people. It's like, I know this is probably harder than putting a home on Mars, but we're going to try to do this. We're going to try and get this effect, right?
So funny.
They have to work together.
So funny you brought up Disney because Disney is like the quintessential example of this dynamic behind this theory that any successful business requires two main sort of archetypes at the head, a visionary and an integrator. And those skills are rarely contained in one person. Visionary, big, messy, all over the place, big ideas.
Right.
Integrator can bring those ideas down to earth and like drive those forward. And Walt Disney was, again, one of the most famous kind of visionaries out there. His brother was this kind of behind the scenes integrator that made all those, made those trains run on time. And I just find it so interesting that, 50, whatever, I don't know how old Disney is, 60 years later, whatever it is, you're bringing this organization that's now orders of magnitude larger than it was when these kind of integrators, this integrator visionary combo started it. And you've kind of described how they, at some level, must have maintained that sort of duality to be able to get those great sort of visionary ideas, but also integrate them, bring them down to earth, and actually execute. That's a very hard skill. That's a hard dynamic to balance because those types are so different,
Yes, absolutely. And this goes to the core of what you said. For any business mission to be successful or military mission, you have to have both of those things, which means you have to have a team. And if you have a team that's working together, again, is the visionary the leader and the implementer is the follower? I mean, not exactly,
right?
But beneath the implementation, there needs to be followers who are following the vision that came, right? And well, I guess they are following the vision, the one who implements, the integrator, and the integrator's following the vision. So to some extent they are.
Yeah, and the integrator, I think, influences the vision a little bit because they have to make it a reality, right? And they say, well, we can't do that, but we can do this. And there's this sort of natural collaborative, that's what I read this book about integrators and visionaries, and that's how they kind of describe the integrator, that they can take this sort of concept and, from the ether and bring it into earth and put it on the ground and, manifest this sort of physical thing that was an idea in the visionary's mind and in that visionary's words. It's an interesting skill.
Yeah.
And there's an interaction there. It's not just sort of taking an order and cooking the dish,
That's right. And actually, this is the military too. This is how the mission gets established. So, I mean, take that hill is what the general would send down.
Right.
Stop. Let's just take Gettysburg, right? Stop the flank, right? We don't want to get flanked. Hey, Joshua Chamberlain, take that hill. There's no instructions on how to take the hill.
So now
right?
you got to get creative to solve that goal.
That's Joshua Chamberlain's business, right? And then if he has subordinate units, hey, U5, U squad over there on this side at the bottom, U5 at the top, take as much munitions up there as you can. And so at each level, there is some creativity on how to approach and accomplish the mission.
Yeah.
But someone has to have the vision and the strategy of war, right? What we want to accomplish, whether that's politically driven or or what have you, the strategy. And then there's so many levels underneath that require, as you said, the integrator but everybody stays true to the vision. And I think that's where a compliance officer has a little bit of friction on going back to the risk tolerance, right? That's where that friction can come up. I was like, I believe in my company's mission, but they're just so risk tolerant. It makes me uncomfortable. Like, we could get in trouble for this. We could get in trouble for that. It's just a matter of time before this happens. And then that discomfort makes you not enjoy your work. And so it's just so important to align yourself. And these are hard questions when you go to interview for a position. So, do you have any questions for us, Amy? If you're looking at this chief ethics and compliance officer job, can you tell me what your risk tolerance is? Like,
how's the followership in your company?
Can you tolerate, right? And do people really follow the mandatory training? Are people really going to take it? Am I getting set up? Because it's too easy to point to the compliance officer. Well, we hired her, but our training stats haven't improved at all after a year. When it's really not the person, right?
It's the dynamic. It's the circumstance. It's how the plan has been executed to that point, and the resulting impressions that are latent in the organization.
That's right.
There's a lot of factors,
and the discipline and incentives. And I would just add, to bring that to bring home another military analogy, that's something that the United States military gets. It gets it, right? It gets it done, and it does it well, which is the incentives and discipline piece. That element of their program is really strong. And people may not realize that there are things in the civilian world that are not criminal that are criminal in the military. And one of them is dereliction of duty. If you do not do your job well, if your job was to file 300, paper copies of health reports, like lab reports and MRI results, and you don't do that, and you throw them in the dumpster or shred them, that's a crime. You get charged with a crime in the military for that. And that's not a parallel to the civilian world necessarily, but the accountability, whether it's a letter of reprimand or like an oral reprimand, it could be an Article 15, which is non-judicial punishment, where they can take some of your pay and serve a small amount of time in the brig, like 30 days or so, to a full-blown court-martial. And the problems that the military has difficulty reining in, such as sexual assault in the military, it's because that accountability is lacking for many different reasons, but the accountability is what changes the dynamic, right? Incentives can do that too, to some extent, and nobody's incentivized really in the military with money. You can't get a spot award, you can't get a bonus. You get a letter in your file that said you did an exceptional job when you volunteered for this project. There's a lot of praise and recognition because that's what's free, and it matters in that culture, right? And there's ribbons. The rack of ribbons you wear on your chest
means something.
Can't buy those.
Right.
They mean something in that culture. The time that you invested, the sacrifice that you gave, your skills, like marksmanship, right? If you fire well at the range, you get your expert ribbon. And so that whole culture of recognizing people for their hard work is really robust.
Right.
And there's things that really matter in that culture. And on the flip side of that, the carrot is huge. It's nice. It's right there. And, you can take a bite of it, but the stick is there too.
Right. And it's a big stick.
I think it's a big stick, right?
It'll follow you forever.
If you miss the movement of a plane or a ship, you were supposed to move to another station, or you're supposed to go temporary duty someplace, you miss your plane, you miss your ship, especially if you missed it intentionally, it's crime in the military, right? It's charged under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. You can be court-martialed and disciplined for that. You can go to the brig. You can be discharged from the military if the offense is serious enough. So
I'm thinking of building a little brig in our office, actually.
A little brig? Yeah. That's Then the question becomes, who is the leader who can send someone to the brig?
I feel like it should be me. But I don't trust anyone else.
Yeah, it should be you. I trust your judgment.
Well, good. Thank you.
So, that's the other piece I think that we can borrow from the military and translate into the corporate world. And that is, I've heard the argument before, training doesn't help. It's not going to shape behavior, incentives and discipline. That's all the only thing that's going to work. And I'm happy to argue that any day, because unless the military is executing on a specific mission that's given, every day is training. You can't tell me that training
They're not just hanging
doesn't
out.
affect people's behavior.
Totally.
You get trained in a jet all day. You get trained on how to introduce evidence in a court-martial.
How about
if you're
the
a young
NBA?
JAG. Training.
How about every sports team? Right.
Training. Yes. Now, you can't just do training in isolation, because if you don't have the accountability at the other end, we were all trained, we're not supposed to do this, and look at Doug over there, he's constantly doing this and nothing's happening. People notice that, right? People notice when there's no accountability, and then they have less drive to comply with the rules themselves, right? This is what they talk about with pink collar crime, right? It's the, the opportunity, the justification. It's the justification of, well, nobody's enforcing the rules. So, why am I following them? Doug's getting all this advantage and nothing happened to him.
Well, yeah,
right?
it's a picture of what the true incentives are,
Yes. Yes, that's absolutely right.
And that's what people respond to. Yeah.
Yes. And if you're on a base and you see people getting court-martialed for certain behaviors, it's going to be, for most people, overwhelmingly most people, a huge deterrent to do that. Right. Whether it's a DUI in the military, if you're an officer, is
how about that?
Career-ending.
How about that point? How much, there's so much, I get that everybody has to, if you sign up for the military, you have to do your job and all that kind of stuff. But that doesn't prevent people from leaving and saying, screw it, I'm going to get the court martial. I don't care. It's not like that. It's not like what I'm describing never happens, But to your point, there is this reinforcement, despite that stick that's out there, there's this constant reinforcement. There's this constant incentivization of medals and letters and files and stuff like that drive the right behaviors. And people can see that cycle over and over again with their peers or people that they look up to, where they did this thing, they engaged in this, system, and then they had this kind of an outcome. There are so many people that speak up in an organization that aren't held up as examples for other folks. And there's so much good work that's done within the compliance office that for some fear or reason, we're not taking credit for it. And we're not showing folks, hey, look how many investigations we did last year. Look at how many, changes came from these investigations. Look at our follow-up time. Look how we've driven that down. Here's our satisfaction rate from people that have engaged in this speak-up process. For an example, you can do this across any of the different aspects of a program. But so much of our job, because we don't have a brig, because we don't have court martials and JAG and all that other stuff, we have to work with what we have. And I just find it's so baffling to me when our job is to crowdsource this risk intelligence, to your point. In order to do that, we have to get people to engage. And in order to get people to engage, we have to put some incentives out there. We have to put some data or some information out there, right, for them to respond to and see. And it's we have all this information, all this good work, and we don't get any benefit from it. We don't get any sort of public credit from it that can keep that snowball that is a good culture starting to roll down that hill a little faster.
And that goes to a key point on speak up culture, because a speak up culture doesn't mean people only speak up about things that go wrong.
That's right.
A speak up culture is that people equally speak up about things that go right. You're not going to call the hotline, but there's so many corporate cultures that I encounter in my work with my clients where everybody points out really quickly when something's jacked up. Really quickly. Everybody's all over it. Oh my God, can you believe this that they sent me? Look at this. It's blah, blah, blah. But when it goes right, they're not going back to that coworker and saying, thank you. What you sent me was absolute perfection. I was able to build on that and I sent it right along to the client. Chef's kiss, great work.
Right.
There isn't so much of a culture of that.
That's right.
Is present in the military because the pay is so bad.
Well,
praising
I'm trying
each
to
other
push
on
that
a job
stuff.
well done.
We're trying to
great.
push that a lot because it can't just be all the bad stuff. We want people, to your point, speaking up about everything. We want everyone participating in this risk management thing. And a risk is not just a code of conduct violation. If you look at fraud, waste, and abuse, the biggest component of waste in an organization, or the biggest kind of aspect of fraud, waste, and abuse is waste, is bad processes, is things not going right. And there are people that are in those processes that definitely have ideas on how those processes can be improved that are not speaking up about it, that are just taking what's given and they're just going to kind of keep moving forward. But when you can unlock that, there's so much more insight and so much more, I don't know. It builds more connections in this web that is your culture,
Right. And the culture where someone doesn't feel free to share a good idea to streamline a process or something is one where they're afraid they're not going to get credit for that idea.
Yeah, right.
So, but they just want credit and praise. It doesn't necessarily mean that they need to be promoted, but when you have an environment where people are recognized and praised for the good work that they do and their ideas, then people want to come forward after Amy's praised by the boss for this great idea.
They see this works. Wow.
I want this too. Yeah. I want the boss to see. I have some ideas on how I can improve over in my office.
Yeah, when I make a big deal,
throw those out there.
When I make a big deal about my daughter's spelling test, then my son wants to get a good grade in his spelling test, and my other daughter wants to do good in school. Right? To your point, they're going to respond to the positive and to the negative.
praise is an incentive, and we don't speak up enough
Right.
about what goes right. We're focused as compliance officers. We create a culture where people feel but if people feel comfortable speaking up about what's going right, then they're definitely going to speak up when something's going wrong.
Right, because
so that's
even
really
a
be the
bigger
target.
expression of their like level of like ownership to that culture, to the mission, to whatever. Amy, I really wish this was like a 2-hour episode. We got to do something again soon.
Oh, hey, anytime. I've loved the conversation. Thanks for having me.
We could maybe do an ethics verse together. That could be fun. Every Thursday we do webinars, and I'd love to do something with you on that because I think you have such a great perspective and very unique experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, let's look into that. I have a book in the works on this topic. So, on the topic of what we can pull from the military that works in corporate compliance, it's a little ways out.
That would be cool.
Yeah, I'd love to come on the ethics first and talk about any of these issues, whether it's incentives and discipline or followership or all of the above.
Well, we're at this interesting inflection point with our industry where I think the next 10 years are going to look way different. And I think the best organizations are going to be the ones that are able to pull that 10 years forward, 5 years, 6 years. You know what I'm saying? Make that 10-year reality a reality 2-3 years from now. You know, and it's going to come from doing small tweaks to the program, small mentality shifts with respect to how we interact with the workforce and how we leverage this, this crowd to get more insights and where we can direct our efforts. I mean, that's really what the name of the game is. It's not about, figuring out, in my mind, like, should compliance report through legal or should it be standalone? I mean, that debate will keep going on and we'll probably keep kind of swinging back and forth and so forth. Like, at the end of the day, the way we engage with the workforce can drive so much magic, to your point.
That's right. That's right. Well, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. So Clear Resources, Amy McDougal, look her up on LinkedIn. Check out Clear Resources. They have some phenomenal services you guys do it all. I mean, from program assessments to, give me a quick rundown from implementation. How can we improve? Really a lot of, so check out their website, check out Amy on LinkedIn, and check her out on the Ethics Verse. You heard a commitment here that we would do one, so it's coming. All right, Amy, bye-bye.